It was one of the most defining storylines in the news in the 1990s, not only in the United States, but around the world, and is considerably talked about to this day in length. The Waco situation, the initial raid, the standoff, and the fiery conclusion to what was a horrifying sequence of events. On this long form conversation platform, I'm Bryan Fenley, and I am going to be welcoming on to talk about the Waco situation from beginning to end and connect as many dots as we can. It's Dr. Stuart Wright. He's a PhD professor over at Lamar University. Hard to find somebody that has studied this historical event more than he has. And I invite you to listen to our conversation now. And as we do, I encourage you humbly to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It really has to be some type of tragedy to where all you have to say is the name of the city and people automatically link it to a horrifying event. In this case, Waco happened over 30 years ago, but there are still unanswered questions, and there is no better person in studying what happened those 30 plus years ago than my guest today, Dr. Stuart Wright, author and professor at Lamar University. He also has written many books, including Armageddon in Waco, Critical Perspectives on the Branch Davidian Conflict. I'm Bryan Fenley. Dr. Wright, thanks so much for allowing us to have you on to get more clarity on what, even to this day, there are still a lot of polarization between what happened, what didn't, and we see that even to this day, it's a very talked about subject. So, really appreciate your time.
You bet.
What was it like in Texas for you when, and we recap what happened here, where there was an ATF raid in 1993. There was a shootout. Reports say that there were four ATF agents that were killed. Reports also say 5 to 6 Branch Davidians. Then there was the 51-day siege. And then there was the raging inferno, the horrifying burning down of the community and where the Branch Davidians lived. 76 reports say Branch Davidians were killed, 20 to 25 ranging reports on children who perished as well. You're right in the thick of this in the 90s. What was it like being you as news was starting to be leaked about what was going on there?
Well, I think we were all shocked at the film footage, the media coverage of the initial raid, and then the shootout, and there were cameramen and news reporters on the scene because they had actually been tipped off by Dallas news station. So they were there to film the whole thing, and thank God that we have that film because then you can get past some of the narratives and the framing by both parties to see what was taking place. And your eyes tell you that oftentimes the government's construction of that story didn't align with what you were seeing on film. So I'm really glad that we had that film. But it all seems surreal, and it happened so quickly that in real time it was really hard to grasp.
There were these, and there are these two sides. There's the pro FBI side where the people you talk to there say that what was done was what was the best they could do. Sure, everything wasn't perfect. And then you've got, as you referenced, Dr. Wright, the Branch Davidians and those who are more on their side, where they feel like the government did overreach. And even to this day, you're getting finger pointing one side to the other, conflicting truths. Do we take the truths from both sides and meet them in the middle? 30 plus years, and there are still unanswered questions about what went down. How many of those unanswered questions do you feel like are still floating around?
I've got tons of questions, and I probably put thousands of hours into this case over the years. And we still have, Brian, we still have something like 8,000 pages of classified documents that they've never released. So we'd all like to get our hands on that, and we keep hoping that they'll do that. I think that the time limit on that was like 50 years, but we have pressed every presidential administration to release those documents and without any success. So I'll go over a few questions that I still have. And this only scratches the surface, but these are ones that I still keep me up at night. First, I think why did the ATF even think about militarizing this situation? They had to go to great lengths. They had to lie to the Department of Defense and claim there was a drug lab on the property, even to get military assistance, because there's something called the Posse Comitatus law. It doesn't allow the military to enforce civil law. The military and civilian law enforcement are two different institutions with two different missions. The military's trained to kill during times of war, and civil law enforcement take an oath to the Constitution to uphold our rights, right? So very different enforcement tactics and different missions. And so when you start mixing those, oftentimes you get violence and you get tragedies. So this is a concern right off the bat. So why was it necessary for the ATF to request military assistance? They went into Fort Hood and trained in close quarters combat for 3 days. I mean, this is warlike kind of setting up a warlike situation. And of course, later the government investigation that was released in that report in 1995 just castigated the ATF. Said, "What are you doing? What were you thinking?" You know, the information filed in the affidavits was incorrect. Some of it was looked like it was intentionally misleading. The best theory that I've heard, and we'll never know probably, is that the ATF literally was coming up for a new round of funding in March of 1993. They conducted this raid on the final day, the last day of February, February 28. 2 weeks later, right? You had the director of the ATF coming before the budget committee in the House asking for more money to enforce gun violations of gun laws. And the ATF, one of their main purposes is to interdict firearms. So they were asking for a big budget raise. And if you look at the way in which the raid was structured, they had a press corps of people ready to release all kinds of tapes and press release and information. They had it set up. They thought they were going to go and bust the bad guys and get their names and their photos, do a photo op on the front page, and that would help them in their budget negotiations. And then it backfired. They went to all this trouble to set up an entire press corps for the press releases. They didn't even contact emergency folks. There were no ambulances ready to come in case somebody was injured. No emergency response people. They completely mismanaged the whole thing, and they were called out on it in the government report. Secondly, I think my question would be why the FBI's hostage rescue team felt like they had to end that 51-day standoff, and particularly the way they did with them, brought in the tanks from Fort Hood and basically laid siege to that building, and it again ended badly. And a lot of times you'll hear people defend the FBI's actions, saying they were using non-lethal CS gas. But I don't know if you've ever talked to anybody who's in the Army, went through boot camp and was exposed to CS gas for even a minute or two, and they come out coughing. It attacks all your mucous membranes. It is really a nasty experience. And they gas those people for 6 hours. Most of them didn't have gas masks. You don't have a gas mask that will fit children. And there's plenty of, I found this later when I did some of my research, there's plenty of incidents in which people died from exposure to CS. So to say it's non-lethal is misleading. If it occurs in closed spaces, like in that building, it is lethal. So you had a number of people in their autopsy report who died of suffocation and exposure to that gas. So in my mind, I got into big trouble for this. I was a FBI's on their list of persona non grata for a long time. I referred to it as a massacre, and I still to this day will defend that position. There was no reason to do that. And again, as I we talked earlier before the interview was officially recorded. I got a hold of the FBI's protocols on how to conduct hostage barricade incidents, and one of the first things that you come across is be patient. Wait these people out. They will run out of food. They will run out of water. They will grow weary, and they will walk out at the end of the day. And so, why didn't the FBI wait? A year and a half later, there was another incident up in Montana. I don't know if you're aware of this, with a group called the Montana Freedmen,
No.
and it was similar. And they barricaded themselves into this farmhouse, and the FBI's hostage rescue team showed up and surrounded the farmhouse, and he had the same kind of thing. They weren't going to come out. They refused to come out. The FBI waited 81 days in this incident. 81 days. They all walked out. No violence. Nobody was injured or hurt or killed. That's what they should have done at Waco. And the third thing that bothers me, and the most uh, trouble I have understanding, is this notion that the Army Special Forces were on site. They'd never explained to us why that was the case. And again, we've got the 8,000 pages of classified documents that we've never seen. What are the Special Forces doing in a civil law enforcement incident? That really bothers me.
How could it be possible that when April 19th, 1993 happened, when you're seeing tanks and helicopters, that if you're inside the compound as a Branch Davidian and there are snipers that are guarding the premises, where you would feel comfortable, Dr. Wright, in wanting to come out? It wasn't exactly a welcoming sight, which is probably counterintuitive. They think, the FBI, that they can just get them out by force. But look at what meets them when they're outside. And how did the FBI not see that? And why so many people were hesitant to leave the comfort of the compound, knowing what was surrounding them at the time?
Yeah, we have documentation of there was a body that was out in the yard, and the Davidians tried to go outside to retrieve the body so they could bury it, and the snipers were shooting at them. So yeah, they weren't going to leave, and then you had the problem of and we can talk about this as deeply as you want to. I've spent a lot of time looking at it. The hostage rescue team was divided into two groups, the negotiators and a tactical team. And at the time, the tactical team was pretty much in charge. So the negotiations team were sort of dependent or reliant upon the instructions given to them by the tactical team. And they seem to have two different missions. If you go back and look at the successes that the negotiations team had early on, you could say that negotiations were working. 28 people left in the early weeks of the standoff. But the tactical team, who again are militarily trained and have a whole different look on things, undermined the negotiations by doing things like taking tanks and running over their cars and the kids' bikes and things like that, and using unnecessary hyper masculine, toxic show of force. And the Branch Davidians were getting these mixed messages. They would talk to negotiators, they would work something out, they would release a couple of people, and then the tactical team would come and punish them. So you get this kind of mixed message of carrot and stick, and it destroyed the trust that the negotiators were trying to build up. I think the negotiators, left to their own devices and without the tactical team messing things up, might have been able to pull this off without any injuries or further deaths. Um, if you've ever talked to or read Gary Nessner, who was head of the negotiation team for the first part of the standoff, he was eventually removed at the request of the tactical team because they were having fits and arguments over these conflicting tactics. He wrote a book and he pretty much lays this out for you and says uh, that the tactical team wanted to punish the Davidians. They saw them as cop killers and they crossed the blue line, thin blue line, and they wanted to punish them. They weren't really interested in getting these people out. The negotiators were. So you had and that's in the congressional investigation report as well. But I talk about it a lot in that paper I'm going to send you
Yeah.
that I published in the Journal of Terrorism and Political Violence. So I talk about how they violated 16 of their own protocols for how they teach and train people to conduct hostage barricade incidents.
How could it be that there's so much disconnect between FBI and other entities about, hey, we want to negotiate. Hey, this is what our agenda is. How does it become that where, yeah, it's an unprecedented situation, but that not everybody is on the same page?
Yeah, it's almost like an internal culture war. You know, different views of the world, different ways of seeing things, more tolerance on one side, more ideas. You got to show force to get your way, and different trainings. You know.
What negotiating tactics have you found in your studies that were most respected and got the best results from the Branch Davidians in what Gary Nestor and the negotiations team, what they saw were advancements in trying to resolve this situation?
Yeah, showing patience, trying to build trust, talking to them, and listening, and being able to listen. And David Koresh went on and preached and talked about his beliefs and so forth. And they were very patient, I think, to listen to a lot of that. And but you want to build trust, and you want to be able to relate to them on a personal level, and just break down the barriers because they see you as an enemy and an outsider. Um, and uh, I don't have those protocols in front of me, but I remember each time that I looked at one of these, I thought, these are great. These would work if the FBI's hostage rescue team, at least the tactical team, hadn't just torn up the book and thrown it away. I mean, these would have worked. So I concluded that this was intentional. They knew what they were doing, and had they been given the authority to carry out their training and do what they were doing, I think it would have worked. As a result of Waco, though, we now have a situation in which both of these units have equal authority. The tactical team does not have authority over the negotiation team. They're co-equal partners. So that was a good thing that came out of Waco. Um, the congressional committees that looked at this decided that that was something that had to be done. So that's a positive, one of the positives.
One of the few
Yeah.
positives, and one of the positives in this negotiation process is that some of the Branch Davidians were escorted out before the massive fire that overtook the compound in April of 1993. My recollection is that you had a chance to speak with some of those who did come out before the fiery ending, and what were your biggest takeaways and what you heard from those people?
They were very upset at being attacked, and they claimed that they were just defending themselves. And if you look at the video of the raid, that was pretty horrific. I mean, uh, uh, 80 armed agents in flak jackets and Kevlar helmets, trained in close quarters combat, just laying siege and just firing into the building. And there were women and children in there. They were on the floor. They were really scared. Um, some of them were able to return fire, but they were they were they were outgunned and overwhelmed. So the situation there, I think, uh, I just don't see anything like it in our history where something like that was carried out. So a lot of bad information, misinformation, maybe some theatrics in order to have some kind of political or economic leverage in budget negotiations in the future. You have mixed motives, but the whole thing was a disaster from the start.
How close, when the standoff was taking place and you were hearing word about what was going down, how close did you get to the epicenter?
I didn't. I was in Beaumont on campus when I saw it, and I drove to Waco, made contact with some colleagues and some friends, but they had us several miles away. They had us barricaded away, so you couldn't really see anything. I was watching on television just like everyone else.
When you were seeing what was happening on television, what were you thinking at the time?
At that time, I was just kind of gathering information. It wasn't, and all the information that we had was coming from the government, so we didn't have both sides of the story. So it only gradually started coming out that there was a whole nother story to be told. But those folks weren't really allowed to speak, and we didn't hear their voices until much later.
How would the story that now we're hearing more of, that other side, how would that have been influenced, say, if social media was present during the initial raid, then the standoff 51 days, and then the very horrifying conclusion in what that would look like?
Chaos. And maybe that would have been a deterrent for the federal law enforcement decisions. But if you had unregulated media looking at this at the time that it unfolded, I think it would have been a lot different. But there's no way to predict how that would have developed. Um, FBI held press conferences every day, and they controlled all the information. So that's all the information that people had for quite a long time.
When those press conferences were happening, how many people were asking the tough questions that needed to be said?
I wasn't at the press conferences, so my guess is that they were able to manage that the information pretty well. And in fact, I'm almost certain that they managed the information just as they wanted to. And so it wasn't until later that other contradicting information started to come out, and but it came out slowly and little by little.
Why do you think it took so long for that information to come out?
Well, you had 76 people who were eyewitnesses ended up dead inside Mount Carmel. Then you had 8 others, I think, who were prosecuted, probably not able to tell their stories because they were in custody. And then you had a few others who were probably heavily intimidated about speaking out. So they just, it wasn't a balance of stories. The government had control of the information.
No matter what side one is on in processing this episode, this event that we're talking about, David Koresh did have, you used the word control, did have some control over the message that he was trying to get across to his followers. We've seen home videos of him in the compound where you've got eyes glued from followers listening and holding on to every one of his words as he is reading through a passage of the Bible or giving a story or an interpretation. Or I know he was a guy that liked to play music as well. What made him so persuasive to those folks, and how people that even at the time when he was first coming onto the scene and building up a following, that there were people that weren't religious at all, and they listened to him speak, and now they want to be a part of what he's doing.
That's always a great question about any leader that we call charismatic. What attracts people and certain kinds of people. I mean, you and I might sit and listen to the same speaker, and you'll be heavily inspired, and I won't, or vice versa. Max Weber, who gave us the sociological concept of charisma, charismatic leadership, talked about that at length, and how and why it appeals to people may be a result of a constellation of variables, psychological and social. And I would love to have an answer for you there, but I'm not really sure. I mean, I listened to his sermons. He didn't do anything for me. So, but for some people, it greatly inspired them, and they committed their whole lives to it. I mean, that was a commune. It was a communal living situation. So you were living it 24 hours a day. That's the ultimate commitment. Um, but we have charismatic leaders throughout history and movements that are founded by charismatic leaders, as Max Weber wrote extensively about. And it's just one of those. Uh, it's a mystery to me, to be honest with you.
There obviously are still a lot of mysteries to the topic that which we're talking about, Waco. There has been a lot of reports about how difficult the childhood was for David Koresh, or Vernon Howell as he was known previously. It's I'm curious from your perspective, knowing what he went through, and maybe we get into some of that, but how that might have contributed to what he was trying to build and the direction that his life would ultimately go.
Yeah, he was religious from the very beginning. He grew up in East Texas. It's a very religious culture, and began memorizing passages of the Bible. And when he came into contact with this group, I think he sort of found his place. Um, and I don't think in the beginning he had much to offer, but in that community, he really uh, he flourished for whatever reasons, and he picked up on their lifestyle and their particular way of living pretty quickly, and I think that was a great incentive for him. Um, and it was just a great fit for him. And he had a mentor in Lois Roden, who kind of she took him under her wing and kind of discipled him, um, so that he had sort of an inside track on the leadership. And then when she died, he became the leader, and he had to grow into it. You can see he makes lots of mistakes and does very immature things in the very beginning, and he kind of grows into that role. But the small group, the small community of people that were part of that Branch Davidian uh, faith accepted him, and he flourished within that environment for whatever reasons.
When he was in that environment and he was in negotiations over the phone with the other side during the standoff, or even when he said okay to doing interviews before all this happened, when there would be news folks that would come on scene and try to learn more about what's going on there. How calculated do you think he was, and how invested he was in what he said and the perception that he wanted to give off?
You know, in the beginning, the people who came to interview him, I think, were looking at kind of a gotcha interview. They were trying to catch him up and maybe embarrass him and try to hold him out as a cult leader. And he learned pretty quickly that those kind of interviews were not going to go anywhere. So he really kind of stopped doing them, and he learned pretty quickly not to do the interviews because he thought they could be twisted. So they weren't great at publicity, and maybe that's because what they were doing probably wouldn't have been accepted by the wider society, and maybe that's part of the draw is you claim that that your community is exclusive and doing something that only God is allowing you to do, and only the elect of the elect can participate, and it's going to break all the rules, but in the end, it's something that has some kind of special divine mission.
At what point in the negotiations do you feel like David Koresh was closest to coming out and ending this on his terms?
I think really toward the end, he was writing his seven seals down, and it would have been really interesting if the FBI's hostage rescue team had let him finish because he promised to come out. And I know that he changed his mind earlier when he said he was going to come out, but I think he might have had a vested interest in getting out these so-called seven seals that he believed that were his kind of revelation and the epitome of his revelation. That would have been really worth seeing. I wish they had been more patient instead of rushing to that um, that assault on day 51. That would have been interesting to see.
Could it be possible, though, knowing somehow it got to him that there were charges that were going to be
Oh,
placed on him that
oh, he
maybe,
knew he was going to prison.
yeah, that he never could there be one angle here, Dr. Wright, where maybe he never intended to come out?
I think you can entertain that idea. A lot of colleagues of mine who have studied this pretty well believe that. Um, I'm kind of neutral. I'm not really sure I can read his mind on that, and I can't pick up anything in particular. I don't think he would have fared well in prison. Um, uh, he was he was slight of build, and knowing Texas, the brutality of Texas prisons, I'm not sure he would have fared very well. So there's no way of knowing that, and I've just never taken a stance on guessing which way that would have gone.
The accumulation of weapons that have been documented on the Branch Davidian side, what do you feel like was the justification for for that, and how much do you feel like that might have had something to do with the initial raid?
Well, that was the basis of the raid. The basis of the raid was a firearms violation. They had basically they had machine guns or automatic weapons that were not registered. Now, in Texas, at the time, I think there were something like 17,000 permits that had been given to people to allow them to have automatic weapons. So it was a matter of just gaining a permit. It wouldn't have been that big a deal. So it's Texas. It's Texas where everybody in your neighbor has a gun. So I don't think it would have been that hard to obtain the permit. So I've always been a bit put off by the explanation that he was violating firearms laws. I think that was a pretext for something else, the other ulterior motives by the law enforcement, by ATF.
Reports are that the Branch Davidians were tipped off before the initial
They
first.
were, yeah.
If they weren't, and I know we're thinking in a different universe here, an alternative universe, how would that have led to a different kind of confrontation? Could it have been worse? Could it have been better?
Well, one of Branch Davidian was a mailman, worked for the post office. His name was David Jones, and two of the journalists, a cameraman and a journalist from Waco paper, got lost. I don't know if you've never been out there, but it is kind of hard to find. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I've been out there many times, so you have to know where you're going. But they got lost, and so they stopped this postal worker who was delivering mail, asked about where the Branch Davidian uh, settlement was, and his name was David Jones, and Jones said, "Well, why are you guys looking?" And they said, "Well, there's something happening, something going down. It's a really big deal." So he went back and informed David Koresh that he thought that they were going to be raided by the police, by the feds. So they knew, Branch Davidians knew that they were coming.
How did David, not Koresh, but the journalist, how did he get tipped off, and how did that, do you feel like happen?
He was part of the raid team. I mean, he was given permission to be there by federal law enforcement. ATF and basically gave them permission to be there. They thought they were going to go and bust the bad guys and get their photos on the front page and be the heroes, and it backfired, right?
When the initial engagement happened and you had these ATF agents coming out of the backs of cattle trucks and taking their positions, what do you think that would have been like if you're a woman or a child inside and the firepower from both ends was it went on for, if I'm not mistaken, hours.
Yeah, yeah, it would have been horrific. Would have been a nightmare. I've talked to a number of the women and children who are now adults, and they were on the floor thinking they were going to be killed. And then there were helicopters that were coming doing overflights, and they were firing um, into Mount Carmel from the air. So they were getting it from all sides. It's amazing that only 6 people died in that initial raid from the Branch Davidian side. There were other people who were wounded, but they didn't die.
When do you feel like came the turning point for the ATF to say, all right, we can't continue this initial raid. We've got to back off.
They ran out of ammunition. They literally ran. That's why they backed off. They ran out of ammunition. Did you know that?
I thought I had heard that, but I
Yeah,
wasn't 100% sure.
yeah.
And they had been, how long had this been going for?
You mean the firefight?
Yeah, the firefight.
Couple hours. Yeah. They emptied they emptied their guns. They used up all their ammunition. And the Branch Davidians let them leave. Branch Davidians still had ammunition. They could have killed every one of those ATF agents as they were leaving, but they let them leave.
That's, and that which is what set off Gary Nestor to try and take hold of this very unprecedented situation as the negotiator. What could the government have done to better understand the plight of the Branch Davidians? And what could the Branch Davidians have done to better comprehend where the government was coming from?
There were several opportunities on both sides uh, to alleviate this tragedy. The ATF's investigator, who was first alerted, this all started when a mail carrier was delivering a package to the Branch Davidians, and it fell open, and a pineapple grenade shell, empty grenade shell, fell out. So he had to report that. He reported to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff forwarded that information to the ATF, and they started an investigation. So the ATF investigator was a guy named Davey Aguilera, and he learned that the Branch Davidians were buying their guns from a gun dealer in Waco by the name of Henry McMahon. And so Aguilera visited McMahon, asked him a bunch of questions about the weapons that he was selling to the Branch Davidians. And at one point in the conversation, um, McMahon excused himself, went to the back room, picked up a phone, called David Koresh on the phone, and said, "Hey, did you know the ATF is investigating you for weapons?" And Koresh said, "Well, have him come out and look, and he can inspect the weapons firsthand." So um, McMahon comes back in the room, hands the phone to Davey Aguilera, and says, "Hey, Koresh has invited you to come and inspect the weapons." Aguilera does this, never speaks to him,
Wow.
never accepts the invitation to go out and actually inspect his weapons peacefully, and they never talked to Koresh uh, and conducted the raid without ever even speaking to him. So, was there a way to uh, you know manage this situation peacefully? Yeah, and was it not taken advantage of by the ATF? It's almost like they wanted to conduct the raid. A lot of people will say, and I think they have a pretty good evidence that the ATF wanted a big show and for the purposes of increasing their funding, and they were to appear before the congressional committee 2 weeks after the raid. So it all looks pretty suspicious that they didn't really want to end this thing peacefully, or they didn't want to end it before they could carry out this big showy raid.
Under that guise, it seems like I've heard reports that they could have apprehended Koresh when he was going on these runs.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Yeah.
I see people talking about that all the time. You could have diffused the situation there. What do you think got in the way of that being the way that things settled? And I know what you're saying from the show part, but beyond that, there had to have been people within the ATF and on the government side that was like, wow, we can probably minimize the damage here if we go that way, but they just didn't have as big of a say.
They the ATF set up a surveillance house across the street. There was an empty house, and four of the ATF agents set up the surveillance house there. Um, I know for a fact from talking to one of the Branch Davidians, who I still have quite a bit of contact with, a guy named David Thibodeau.
Yeah.
David told me that he and Koresh walked across the street with pizza boxes and welcomed their new neighbors, knocked on the door, and so they had Koresh right in front of them. They could have arrested him then, and they didn't. And he jogged right in front of the surveillance house, the ATF surveillance house, a number of times. I don't know how many times, but he jogged all the time in front of that surveillance house on Doubly Ranch Road, and they never arrested him. So they had a chance to isolate and arrest him without jeopardizing or putting into danger the rest of the people at 120 or 130 people at Mount Carmel, and they chose not to do it.
I've also heard that somehow they were able to wire the insides of the compound with microphones or mics that could pick up audio. What is what you've heard from
Yeah,
that happened?
they sent in milk for the babies and for the kids, and they installed listening devices in the cartons of the milk, and they may have inserted them in other things they sent in, but they had listening devices and they could listen in on the conversations that the Branch Davidians were having during the 51-day standoff.
I just as we talk about this, it just baffles my mind that it had to come to what it came to. There's so many ways, so many off ramps to mitigating what turned out to be one of the greatest tragedies in American history. I want to ask you what's most sorrowful about it. I feel like we'd be here forever talking about that.
Yeah. They had so many opportunities to end this peacefully. Um, and I don't know what the federal agencies were thinking. A lot of the wrong people were in charge. A lot of macho energy coming from the FBI, and particularly the hostage rescue team, at least the tactical team, not so much the negotiation team. Negotiators weren't really listened to. Had they been listened to, I think this thing might have ended peacefully with a lot fewer deaths. There were so many outs that they could have taken, and they didn't. They didn't take advantage of them. The whole thing is just a one big tragedy.
There have been a lot of movies and shows that have reenacted what's happened and dramatized it for the public now to see. I know Netflix had put out a documentary, I think it was on the 30-year anniversary. You also have Paramount Plus doing a deep dive. It's one of those situations, Dr. Wright, where I feel like it's almost impossible not to have a bias. Why do you think that is, and how have you seen that play out in the types of visual material that have been released, be it through different streaming services, documentary types, or Hollywood?
Yeah, I've actually agreed on several occasions to review some of these documentaries. I think I have two different publications where I reviewed maybe five or six of them at a time. And I can tell you most of them are way off. They're looking for sensationalism. They're talking to the wrong people, or they're not talking to both sides. And so they tend to fall on one side or the other. Uh, it's it's salacious if you want to make it that way. Um, I uh, I don't know what to say about the documentaries, and I've looked at almost all of them because I find them really interesting to see if anyone in particular has come closer to, I think, an accurate portrait. Um, and there may be a few that do better job than others, but as a group, they're not very good.
I can see where you're coming from. I also see there's discrepancies with some of these documentaries in different events during the timeline of this happening, from who took the first shot during the initial raid. There have been documentaries that have said both, one arguing one side, one arguing the other side, and then even documentaries both claiming the other side started the fire. So, how has it come to that where we still have one side saying it was you and one side saying it's not you and or it's not us? And do you think some of the information that has been hidden, that hasn't been released by the government, that's been concealed, could that give us some more answers to some of those questions where you feel like there's a lot of editorial creative freedom with some of those turning points, breaking points in the Waco siege from start to finish? You're seeing different companies that are producing and putting on content saying different things.
Yeah, yeah. And it depends on who they're talking to. So I think different parties have different vested interests in furthering their own goals. And this is a highly divisive topic for very many people. Um, I'll give you one example of something that I witnessed firsthand. I went to the trial in 2000 in Waco, where the Branch Davidians filed a wrongful death suit um, against the federal government for what happened at Waco. And one of the one day, one of the FBI agents who was part of what they called the dog team was called to testify. And it turns out he admitted under oath that they took the first shots, and the first shots were at the dog. They were killing. There was a pen of Malamutes, dogs in the front of the Branch Davidian settlement, and their assignment was to get out first uh, um, out of the cattle trailers and kill the dogs. So the first shots fired were actually that killed the dogs. And my theory here is that the Branch Davidians just heard fire shots and then returned fire. And then all hell broke loose. But the first shots fired were actually the ATF dog team. And that's a part of the court record if you want to go look at it.
How do you expect to have a civil conversation the other side when you go about that type of business?
People get very emotional, they get very angry, and it's really hard to have a conversation about these things. Even if you have facts on your side, um, people have too much invested emotionally. So it's not a topic that you want to take lightly at dinner as part of a dinner conversation, unless you have people who seriously want to know and will do the time to look up this information. I can give them references. I can show documentation. I've spent 30 something years looking into this and have at least a dozen publications on various aspects of the Waco incident. So if they're willing to do the research, that's great. Most people aren't.
The the government, how far has it come along in admitting where they made missteps?
Not very far. This is a black eye for federal law enforcement, and they just soon bury it. And so it's pretty easy to just say, well, the Branch Davidians were a cult, and David Koresh was a cult leader into discussion, so they don't have to go into details and get into the weeds about all the different things that they did wrong. So it's still controversial 32 years, 33 years later, 32 years later. And I think it will always be kind of one of those things that will divide people, and what you see is their own ideas and beliefs and passions invested in the argument rather than the actual facts of the case.
If you were to talk to a Branch Davidian, what facts would they give you about where they can come to some, they can reconcile that, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. Or if we didn't do this, then it wouldn't have turned to that. Not saying it's all on them, of course, but where a Branch Davidian would come up to you and say, if this happened, then maybe things would have ended up differently.
I still talk to Branch Davidians or children of those their parents who were killed. I'm still in touch with David Thibodeau, who was right in the middle of everything. So I think uh, some of them have tempered their ideas. They see faults on both sides. Um, I really think I really noticed something about this whole incident that has really come to be a focus of a lot of my research, and that's that the far right in this country, far right groups, used the Waco tragedy as sort of a mobilizing event, and they took it and ran with it, and maybe even exaggerated some of the mistakes made by the federal government to inflame anti-government sentiment, which has been unfortunate.
Yeah, and obviously
I,
that
I also got called, I don't know if you know this, when Tim McVeigh blew up the Murrah building, the federal Murrah building in Oklahoma City 2 years later on the exact day of the FBI siege, April 19th. Um, I got involved in that case. I was hired as an expert and stayed on that case for a couple of years and ended up writing a book. I interviewed McVeigh, probably had 9 or 10 hours of face-to-face interview with McVeigh. And of course, he blew up the Murrah building on the second anniversary of Waco. So this thing has spiraled in many different directions, mobilizing militias and far right groups and the Oklahoma City bombing and other kinds of things that has had far-reaching effects and impacts on our society in ways that people, I don't think, really realize.
You also think
It,
about Ruby Ridge and what that had to do, the Ruby
it,
Ridge.
it was a forerunner, but Waco was really the catalyst. I think had there not been a Waco, people would have moved on from Ruby Ridge, but Waco was a wake-up call for the far right, and they took full advantage of it.
What was a wake up call when you spent that time talking to Timothy?
He uh, he believed that the Branch Davidians were basically murdered, and they never paid the price. Nobody was ever held accountable. And so he was going to take it into his own hands and hold the federal government accountable. And he blew up the federal building, Murrah building in Oklahoma City, killed 168 people. Almost all of them were federal workers.
What was it like sitting in his presence, knowing the devastation that he had incurred?
Tim was a funny guy. He didn't look like a terrorist. He had kind of a childish face and a boyish demeanor. It was hard to imagine that he did pulled off this deadly terrorist bombing, but I mean, he thought he was on this personal crusade, that he thought he was right. And he was embedded in a whole culture at that time, right-wing culture, gun culture of people who were always inflaming feelings and passions about what happened at Waco.
What
They
else did
they saw it as sort of um, a last straw, that the federal government murdered these Branch Davidians, and that they were going to take their revenge.
what else did Timothy say about Waco that you recall?
I wrote a book about this. It's called Patriots, Politics, and the Oklahoma City Bombing. So I talk about some of the things that we talked about. Um, he was convinced that the government was going to eventually take away everybody's guns, which was a paranoid belief among the far right. And that Waco was just the start of this kind of gun Gestapo that was going to take everybody's guns away, and then um, I guess be an overlord in society by taking people's rights away once they couldn't defend themselves. The guns were the last line of defense, kind of stuff. I didn't buy it. It seemed kind of nonsense to me, but I know the set of arguments that he was advancing, and that's the far right line on guns.
And if we go right to after the fiery ending, and now you've got a crime scene, how well was that preserved in terms of making sure that what was there was kept and that people could get the information from those different things that they saw and they could take with them?
Yeah, the crime scene was not preserved; it was destroyed. They said the crime has already been committed. These people are dead. They did not preserve the crime scene. They destroyed the crime scene, and that just infatuated and inflamed all the conspiracy theories, as you can imagine. It was a really stupid decision by the feds.
What could have been done to avoid that happening? Who had to have, or who could have, or maybe it's more likely now. who could have stepped in to make sure that there is an honest assessment here?
You mean now,
Yeah,
32 years
yeah,
later?
let's say like how would it have been possible to preserve something like that?
Well, you always preserve a crime scene. That's pretty standard law enforcement protocol, and particularly something on this scale. So it was pretty incriminating and pretty bad decisions to destroy the crime scene. Um, so that only led to conspiracy theories that they were trying to hide evidence.
When you have visited since where all of this happened, and you've said that you visited Waco many times afterwards, what are you felt experiencing in and knowing what happened here?
Oh yeah, it's emotionally unsettling still. I was there, gosh, 2 years ago, I guess last, and the property is owned by another religious group, kind of an offshoot of the Branch Davidians, and they maintain the property, so you can still go there and visit, and some of the parts of the bunker are still intact. The old swimming pool that was there behind the main building is parts of it are still there. So you can walk the grounds, and it's 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 disturbing. It's really difficult to know all those people died there. I think completely unnecessarily.
How well do you think the the fallen have been honored in some sort of memorial? And what more do you feel like could or should have been done in the immediate aftermath of all this happening to honor and recognize the men, women, and children who lost their lives?
I think there was an effort to do that. There was some monuments put up on the property with the names of all the people who died. And originally there was actually um, I think plants, I want to say crepe myrtles maybe that were uh, planted for each one of the Branch Davidians that died. And then the possession of the property passed to another kind of sectarian part of the Seventh-day Adventist uh, that were call themselves Branch Davidians, but they would a completely different branch, and they took all that down. And and the guy that runs it now is I don't think somebody that was is very sympathetic with what happened. So the property is still there, and you can still go there and visit the site, but those who have possession of it now are not were not part of the original community.
How many people do you think since then have visited the site for whatever various reasons?
I would a lot. I have no way of knowing, but every time I go there, and I've probably been there a dozen times, there are always 30 or 40 people on the property walking the grounds. So that would be hard to estimate. I don't know if anybody kept numbers, particularly in the early years, probably the first 5 or 6 years after this happened. A lot of visitors. But to this day, 30 years later, we're still, if you go there today, there'll be people visiting. They have a mock-up of the compound, and they have testimonies, written testimonies of some, and oral testimonies of some of the Branch Davidian survivors. And you have a kind of an old church house that was built after all this happened because everything was destroyed in the raid, in the fire.
In all of your comprehensive studying of David Koresh, how much do you feel like he really believed in and was doing what he was doing in good faith? And what are the chances that some of the things he was trying to do might have been sinister in nature?
That's a great question. That's a question that we always ask about charismatic leaders. Do they really believe what they say they believe? Did Rajneesh believe what he preached? Did Jim Jones believe what he preached? Did, this or that charismatic leader? That's a tough question, and I don't know that anybody has the answer to that. Um, I think listening, I've heard him preach so many times on these on tapes, audio tapes I've listened to. I think he believed uh, he was a prophet and was chosen by God. That was his belief, and I don't think he was faking it. I think he sincerely believed that. And in the case of David Koresh, but I don't make a sweeping statement about every charismatic leader that has come down the pipe.
What do you think about, it's been reported that he had, you know, quite a few sons and daughters. What kind of father he might have tried to be for them, even with running, being the point person for the Branch Davidians and mm, leading that sect.
For him, the fathering of these children by these different women, I think he had 17 different children by different women. I think it was part of a religious vision that he had that these children were going to be the elders in the part of the 24 elders during the millennium. So he saw it as a religious and spiritual mission. Beyond that, I don't know that he uh, was all invested in being their parent. And a lot of these women were already married to other men, and but they just saw this as a calling. Um, and some of these children that he fathered were really raised by other couples, by other men and women.
He was raised by a single mom, David
Yeah,
Koresh. And
Bonnie Haldeman. I got to know her pretty well.
yeah, what can you take from your time talking with her?
Um, Gosh, I always saw her as kind of a victim. I think she went through some bad marriages. She had David Koresh or Vernon Howe when she was a teenager, and she came from a kind of a tough background. Had a unsuccessful marriage. I think her first husband was abusive. I found her to be really sweet. I liked her, and she wasn't terribly well educated, as you might imagine. And so Vernon Howell, or which later became David Koresh, I think was a product of kind of a broken family arrangement. But she was very sweet and very loving toward him, even as he got this vision of himself as this messianic figure.
How much do you think he relied on her for support, words of encouragement, guidance? How directly involved was she in his life as he became an adult?
Uh, you know, they went through periods where there was a lot of communication, and then other periods where she was kind of gone, and they didn't really communicate a lot. But I think that there was a love. I think she loved her son, and David loved his mom.
If I'm not mistaken, did there happen to be a tragic ending to the mom's life?
Bonnie, trying to remember how Bonnie Haldeman died. I don't recall right now. I spent a lot of time with her over the years, here and there. I always found her to be a really sweet person. I really liked her a lot. Um, but toward the end, I lost contact with her, and I'm not quite sure how I don't remember, I don't recall how she died. Um, I
I
don't recall.
Yeah.
I have to look it up.
Well, while I have you here and as we continue, I'm just because it's on my mind. Uh, David Koresh, mom, I remember reading something. Yeah, Bonnie. So there is a report. and I'm just reading this off Google as we're having this conversation, that David Koresh, according to CBS News, this is probably after you'd lost contact, obviously, with her. In 2009, she was murdered, and her at the time when this article was written in 2009, David Koresh's aunt was charged. I guess according to the CBS News, and this is again, I don't know what's happened since then as far as information that has been accumulated, but she was found, according to CBS News, at the home of her sister in rural area near Chandler, Henderson County, and they at the time when this article was put out by CBS, it says that Koresh's aunt was in custody on a murder charge. So that to me, and not to put you on the spot, obviously you had a relationship with her, but with that CBS reporting, it just adds just another dynamic to this
Tragedy.
very deep story. Yeah, dense
Yeah.
story.
Now that you mention it, I do recall hearing that, but I never delved delved into the details. Um, I got caught up in probably something else at the time, and went through some my own health issues. So I don't know the full story there. I'd have to go back and do a little bit of research and some reading.
Well, all the
She was a sweet woman. She was a really sweet woman. I hate to think that she was murdered.
Well, that certainly was just the reporting that I
Mhm.
came across from CBS News, and just want to give them the
Okay.
courtesy there. In 2009, that article came out. But in in summary here, Dr. Wright, I want to leave you with one more question, and that is, how is it that, and why is it about all that we've talked about? How have you felt so compelled to give so much of your life to studying and knowing the the causes and the outcomes and the different opinions and what we know from a educational standpoint of what the facts are and what's still discussed? What internally for you convinced you that this was something that you needed to dedicate your life to?
It didn't plan it. It didn't start out that way. I have an interest in these new or non-traditional religions, usually because they're kind of in the early stages, if not the literal birth stage, and that fascinates me. How do religions begin? How did they get started? How did these founders or prophets or whomever where do they find these ideas and what is their inspiration and what are they thinking? So that's what really fascinated me about all of this. And then I kind of fell into the Branch Davidian incident. I um, I don't know. I just find the whole idea intriguing to me that people believe they have a hotline to God and that God is speaking to them and giving them these revelations and uh, visions of a different world. And really, if you go back in time, they've been with us since kind of the uh, early periods of history. Our histories are dotted with religious movements and religious visionaries, and and whole societies have been founded by religious leaders. So I just think it's part of the human mystery.
In closing, I find myself honored to have shared this time with you, and I thank you for enabling me and all those who will be listening to really get a poignant perspective, one that comes from years and years of studying, years of talking with people directly involved in this. And to your point at the beginning, times have changed in 30 years plus, and the way that people observe this news item has changed as well. But what has been unchanged is your commitment to seek the truth, and in the work that you've done is should be commended. One of your books, Armageddon in Waco: Critical Perspectives on the Branch Davidian Conflict. Dr. Stuart A. Wright, he is author and professor at Lamar University. I'm Bryan Fenley. Couldn't put into words just how much this meant to me to have this type of discussion with you. Heartfelt, tough, but educational and certainly very interesting. And unfortunately, it had a very sour and sullen ending. But thank you for all you've done in studying this.
Yeah, thank you.